dirty, responsible, poverty alleviating, poverty creating, criminals, rural entrepreneurs. Ghana's diverse ASM sector has many faces. Ghana's ASM provides 1 million jobs as diggers, haulers, and processors. It provides an additional 6 million jobs off the mine site. Professor Gavin Hilson, one of the top researchers in this field, estimates that for every one mine site job, there are 6 created downstream as taxis, mechanics, barkeepers, restaurant staff, and so on. Therefore, we're not just talking about 1 million jobs and 1 million people. We're talking about 7 million people whose work has stalled because of the ban. Before the ban, ASM were responsible for about 35% of the gold production in Ghana, which is a remarkable achievement that should be celebrated. And as we know, the gold sector as a whole provides about 28.3% of government revenues, 6% of national GDP, and is a major source of foreign income. Women play a very large role in this sector, possibly up to 40% of all mine workers. Ghana is famous for joining Kenya, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, and Tanzania for having some of the highest participation rates in the continent of women miners. Yesterday I met some women mine owners, lady bosses, and then a couple days ago I met kuli kuli, ladies who, I'm learning the local language, one of them, bit by bit. I know some Swahili too. And kuli kuli, for those who don't know, are those who mine the waste of other miners. So they mine the tailings. It's their waste rock, I should say. And there's usually a lot of gold in the waste rock, and they make their living that way. So, and you also have some top-tier organizations already in the country. You have Solidaridad, who does some tremendous work on a project called the Golden Line. You also have the ILO doing a project called Caring Gold. You have the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, working on the Minamata Convention. And you also have Friends of the Nation and the Institute for Economic Affairs working on policy and local engagement. So these are some of the top organizations in the world and locally working on this sector. Small-scale mining and Galamsey are separate. And that's important to recognize. And both have challenges that we cannot ignore. But together, we can work on these many issues as a country. And in my work, I sit at the center of many conversations about ASM, about its development, about its challenges, but also about its opportunities. And in this presentation, I'd like to talk about various trends that I think may be of inspiration to you as you ponder next steps in developing the ASM sector, the small-scale mining sector, in terms of resource efficiency, job preservation and expansion, and in terms of development benefits. And in the end, I'd like to discuss some ways that we can move forward regarding the ban that is currently affecting all miners, legal and not legal. And the ban right now is in its 17th month. So the first trend I'm going to discuss is some emerging market opportunities. Oh, this is me with some kuli kuli and then visiting a mine site on Tuesday. And these are some of the local organizations and international organizations here. So the first trend I'd like to talk about is market opportunities specifically aimed at artisanal and small-scale miners. You've likely heard of fair mined and fair trade gold, which follows the fair trade model of agriculture, which focuses on small-scale producers. They capacity build the small-scale producers up to a certain international standard, and in exchange for good ethical performance, they get more money. And if they go mercury-free, they get even more. So for miners, I'll read this because it might be small for some folks. They get a guaranteed fair price for their gold, and I'll talk about how much in a moment. They also get an additional premium as a reward from the market to go towards social development and various projects in the community. So not only are they getting a better price, they're getting some development benefits. They get direct access to international markets and responsible supply chains. They get legitimacy with the government saying, you know, a small-scale miner and the best in the world. I've achieved the highest standards in the world. And they get access to a network of miners and allied organizations. For the gold industry, there's a real sea change going on right now within the global sourcing sector. Companies are looking for responsible miners to source from. And achieving fair trade gold is one way that they can prove that they're doing the right thing and sourcing legally. So Fairmind offers the opportunity for risk mitigation, for companies to position themselves as pioneers and as leaders working towards sustainability. And for consumers, Fairmind and fair trade is a very special thing. They know it's a guarantee of how that gold was mined. And there's not enough gold right now, not enough fair mined gold, I should say, not enough fair trade gold. The two organizations have approached PACT and others to try to get more fair trade and fair mined gold into the supply chain. And why can't Ghana produce that? So these are the two differences between fair trade and fair mined gold and fair mined ecological. If you go mercury free and cyanide free, you get an additional premium. So these are the current prices. The ecological gold is the highest standard possible, and there's two organizations in the world who've achieved it. One's in Mongolia and one's in Colombia. So these are some Mongolian miners. If they can do it in Mongolia, why not here? The next initiative I'd like to talk about is craft. It's going to be released next month, and I'm on their advisory committee. And craft is the code for risk mitigation for ASM engaging in formal trade. And it's basically a minimum technical standard for the world. And it establishes shared expectations between artisanal gold producers and downstream users, and a framework for assessing performance, creating efficiencies, and enabling greater scale for environmental and social improvements. And I think this might be a really interesting way forward for Ghana. Think of it as a stepping stone for fair trade and fair mind. It responds to the emerging norm of documenting the provenance, so where things came from, the conditions under which they're mined. And specifically, it responds to the European Union's new conflict minerals law, which if you mine gold, you're affected. The European Union has copied the US by targeting tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. But instead of just focusing on DR Congo and the countries around it, they made it a worldwide application. So if you are a gold miner and you want to access European markets, you have got to show that you know where your gold came from. And craft has been embraced by the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Exchange, as a way to show that provenance. So if Ghana would like to access all the markets possible and get a better price, craft is a really great standard to embrace. It'll be released later this month or early next. Now, wouldn't it be interesting if all the government's regulatory framework were to align with craft, where the government agents, local NGOs, civil society were to all know craft, all know the standards of craft, and we work together to help Ghanaian small-scale miners reach the craft standard and be seen by the global community. The second trend I'd like to talk about today is ASM-LSM cohabitation, or cooperation, I should say. So we've all heard about concession sharing agreements, where ASM or small-scale miners share a concession with a large-scale company. This is one common practice where a large-scale company will set aside an area for the small-scale miners, usually require the miners to sell to them because it's their gold, it's on their concession, but then the miners can take it home. So it's a win-win in that the large-scale mine gets more gold than it might have mined otherwise. And the miners get land they might have not necessarily accessed otherwise. The second way of the future is facility sharing. Now, this is something that we're seeing in Colombia and in Zimbabwe, where PACT has programs. This is where not only are the large-scale miners sharing their concession, they're also sharing their equipment. And that way, we avoid mercury altogether, because large-scale miners, there's no legitimate use for mercury in large-scale mining. If they're using mercury, that's a big problem. They're not a professional outfit. In this way, in Colombia and Zimbabwe, the artisanal and small-scale miners have actually been built in to the business model of these large-scale companies. So the miners will take their ore, their concentrate, to the facility, and then they'll get a higher yield than they would have otherwise. And so they're making more money. And also the large-scale miner is mining with tailings, which is a nice gain for them. And the last program I'd like to talk about is the technical assistance and market access trend that we've been seeing mainly in Latin America, but again, there's no reason it can't be brought to Ghana. This goes beyond simply sharing land. This goes to improve the level of mining happening either on the concession or on neighboring concessions. So you can lend technical expertise, such as an engineer, a geologist, but you can help them access better markets. So there's a lovely story of women, they call them payaqueras in Spanish, but they're culi, basically, where a large-scale mine helped them raise the standard of mining. So they gave them dust masks, they gave them a helmet, they gave them boots, and taught them some better ways to process their gold, and shared facilities. And now that group has not only met the responsible jewelry standard of mining, which gives them access to groups like Cartier. They've also met the fair mine standard. So the highest standard in the world has been achieved by Kuli. So it's not impossible. And again, why not Ghana? We have to be more imaginative about our collaboration. And it's something interesting, isn't it? Some of the most vulnerable people in the world can be making jewelry for some of the richest people in the world, isn't it? And Cartier does buy from them. So the last trend I'd like to talk about is emerging trends in environmental management. And good environmental practice within ASM is honestly one of the hardest topics there is. I'm discussing it because Ghana's environment and the damage being caused to it was one of the reasons for the ban. And so I'd like to focus on that for a few moments. There are a number of free, already existing materials that have been developed for the last several decades by other organizations that are focusing on best practice of rehabilitation in a number of different geographical contexts. Something called smarter mining was first developed in Sierra Leone by local engineers, and it's been used elsewhere in Côte d'Ivoire, for example. And it makes, as you can see in this figure here, it makes things very simple. KIS, keep it simple. It's an engineering term, but it's also a good way to look at any materials you produce in the sector. Smarter mining exists. I know the University of Mining at Tarkwa has also developed materials and has been engaging small-scale miners for a long time. I know the Women in Mining Association mentioned that they've been going to Tarkwa for a long time to get technical assistance. So you can gather these materials, laminate them so they're field friendly, so they can survive the mud and the rain. Distribute them to new miners. Offer them as coaching materials. You know, whenever we do these environmental monitoring and regulatory visits, it shouldn't just be you doing things wrong. The conversation should be how to do things right. And these materials can help coach anyone to how to do things right. This is some basic prospecting know-how that smarter mining is helping. And then there's some various rehabilitation methods for swamp conditions and various things. So, moving forward. And wrapping up. The last topic I'd like to discuss today is the well-intentioned ban on illegal mining. Unfortunately, the ban has both affected legal and illegal miners. Those miners who paid their license fee, patiently waited for their paperwork, went through a notice period, carefully mapped out their sites, invested in the right equipment, hired groups of local Ghanaians to work, and restored their land, are being treated as though they didn't do any of that, as though they didn't invest their time and money and treasure into these steps. Ghana is tremendously lucky to have such a dynamic mining sector of large and small-scale operators, of 1 million people employed directly in its mining sector, and 6 million indirectly. But these rural jobs are at dire risk if the ban persists. Mining equipment costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even millions of dollars in some cases, have been destroyed, either blown up, rendered, or key parts of it, the equipment, being taken out so they're rendered useless. And mine owners are in serious debt to both banks and private individuals. Once thriving mining regions are now quiet, and only criminals who ignore the ban are thriving. Meanwhile, the legal, law-abiding citizens and job creators are hungry. There has never been a situation where a mining ban has worked. Never. There has never been a situation where ASM had been completely transferred to other livelihoods. It doesn't work. It only happens when the ore bodies have run out. You can't force this. Mining bans are expensive, and they cause problems. People always come back when the soldiers leave. And it's prohibitively expensive to keep military there for years. It's also not good for democracy or human rights of citizens to be prevented from just trying to make a living, especially when they have illegal permits. Still, the reason the ban is in place is because there's some serious issues that we as a nation have to address. So my recommendations are as follows. Let those who are legally registered and can show they've been mining responsibly, such as having evidence of backfilling or reseeding, like planting trees and things like that, resume mining immediately. A hotline can be established where individuals can request an emergency environmental inspector to visit, confirm, and issue a protective order protecting them from the military's crackdown, I should say. Their names, ID numbers, and mining coordinates can be listed to prevent fraud from others. I understand that sometimes licenses are photocopied, and so it's hard to tell who's legal and who's not. But if you take some details, such as the coordinates and their name and their ID number, these are ways that you can protect those folks who are doing the right thing. These are the responsible miners you want to keep. So why needlessly punish them for already doing the right thing? But those who are legally registered and can show that but cannot show they've been doing the right thing should be given a fixed time period. There's certain rules that govern their license, and if they haven't done it so far, it needs to be very clear because they're affecting livelihoods of everyone. Tie licenses to national ID numbers for better accountability. For everyone else, so examine the legal framework to make sure it allows people to become legal. Sometimes in countries, there are some people who really want to become legal, but they can't. So we need to find out what is preventing people from becoming legal and what is keeping people outside of the law. And are there enough benefits to becoming legal? We have to think about that. We have to encourage people to come out and show themselves, but there has to be both carrots and sticks approaches. So for the rest, we should examine the legal framework and make sure it allows most people to become legal. You want to have an inclusive process versus an exclusive process. Encourage self-organization. In that way, when you're giving trainings, is the best practice in ASM, is when you group people, it's easier to deliver a training versus chasing different folks. You're chasing 1 million people versus just chasing 10,000 groups. It's much easier to manage. Establish an environmental core. I've been struck by the number of people who want to volunteer. The Chamber of Mines, for example, said that their environmental committee is already interested in doing this long before I came. Why can't the University of Tarkwa be paired up with the environmental committee to train small-scale mining associations, women in mining association, interested conservation organizations, local leaders to be certified trainers themselves? And then those groups can train others. So we understand how important the environmental issue is. So let's treat it with the same importance. Let's focus all our national resources on this issue. So this is just an example of how it could work. It's a training of trainers model, where UMAT or Chamber of Mines can develop a curricula with materials that are already established. Go to each region, train a cadre of certified trainers, and then they train different mining groups. And you can have a community monitoring system to report rule breakers. We have a very similar system in our DR Congo program. And we get calls on everyone. So these calls can be used as a weapon, let's be honest, so you can report your competitor. But you do hear all the complaints, and you get a full reporting of all the people who are breaking the law. So that's something that you might be able to borrow here. And the last step is working on creating an enabling environment for long-term transformation of a sector. This is one of the reasons I mentioned craft, fair trade, fair mind. They reward people who are responsible. They reward people who pay their taxes, and with a better price. So really focusing on Mercury education and engagement, focusing on access to finance for technology transfer from Mercury to non-Mercury methods. So for example, providing access for shaking tables for other gravimetric concentration like centrifuges. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could have sanitation facilities in each of the mining regions? Sanitation facilities, they offer better efficiency gains. So it's not someone hiding behind a bush putting cyanide on gold. It's actually a proper facility that's been well regulated, professional outfit that sends trucks out to get the concentrate or the ore. It's milled and then leached, and you get a better return on your gold. And then it's a taxation point for the government, because these facilities cost a lot of money and they don't go anywhere. So it's a really great taxation point. Lastly, we have to focus on all miners. So as Dr. Rose mentioned, there's a lot of different faces in this mining sector. But women are starting from a different place. And so it's really important to think about all the phases of the mining sector and what they need, and to have special set-aside programs that honor the full spectrum of mining in this country. So in this speech, hopefully I provided some interesting talking points for discussion and action-oriented ways forward to position Ghana's gold sector, that is one of the highest achieving in the continent, to be even more globally admired. I'd be happy to take your questions. But first, I'd like to close with a proverb from Mozambique. Go in that direction does not mean that you go. To go means, let's go together. There's a role for us all. Thank you.